The COB is presented by Rabobank. Awarded 2023 SMSF Savings Bank of the Year by Mozo.
Good afternoon, this is the COB, all the stuff you need to know about the day in business and markets. I'm Juliette Sali.
And I'm Daniela Couillet.
Well, we are seeing another downward day, I guess, on the market. I shouldn't say another because we had that turnaround yesterday on the markets. But despite that Wall Street gain, you had those higher bond yields really weighing in on Asian markets, those Japanese chip stocks coming under pressure. And just looking at the market map here, Danny, quite a lot of red on the screen.
Absolutely. I'm just having a look at the ASX 200 and it seems to have closed down around 34 points or 0.5%. And the SIBO 200 off 4 points or 0.3%. So trying to make a comeback in the afternoon session, but then really it looks pretty washed out, to say the least. And I was just going to have a very quick check and on some of the sectors because there wasn't a lot of green on screen. But
if we look at the miners there, they were under pressure. So Rio off by about 1.8%. We saw that dip in iron ore prices as well. So that weighed on Fortescue and South 32. And the banks as well tried to be a bit of a turnaround. ANZ copping that $15 million fine, but a bit of weakness coming through from the banking stocks too.
Yeah, interesting. Healthcare, pretty well, a little bit of green on screen there. Obviously Pro Medicus, which we'll talk about soon, new contract there, but it looks like finally the key healthcare stocks doing what they should do, which is being a bit defensive. And there we have the financials, the banks, possibly responding in the green in response to those higher yields at the longer end of the curve, which we might ask our special guest about today.
I think that's really interesting though, ANZ looking like the strongest there out of the big four, and as I mentioned, did cop that $15 million fine from the federal court. The big themes we're looking at, of course, it's all about the August CPI print that we're going to get tomorrow. You know, that's not going to move the RBA's needle too much. It's going to be about the quarterly one, but still one to watch. And then of course, we've been talking about this risk-off session, and you, Bond Queen, very much looking at the bond route.
I have been talking bonds all day long, and very much in that vein of what is going off with this bond sell-off, and particularly at the longer end of the curve, and also discussing as US yields move higher, what are the implications across the globe given how leveraged financial markets are. And we were just chatting off camera, volumes are very low. So maybe some of these moves are really just quarter end rebalancing on very low volumes. But as per usual, we're all looking for narratives to fit what is going on.
All right, let's check in on some of the stocks that made news today. And you mentioned, Danny, Pro Medicus. It jumped. I think it actually hit a record. And this after winning a $140 million contract with the US-based Baylor Scott White Health. I spoke to the MD about that. Citi research saying, look, they could generate $25 million per year in revenue on the back of this deal.
Wow, and it is a record share price. Closing at the moment up 12% at almost $80, just shy $79.99. And Coronado Global Resources inching higher after Czech-based company. I don't know how you pronounce it. Is it Sev.N?
Sev.N. I know. I thought there was a typo earlier today, and then I wrote it myself, and I was like, oh no, that's how you say it.
Yeah, Global Investments acquired a 51% stake in them.
All right, Liontown Resources down, closing lower by 2% to $2.94. That's despite, of course, Gina Reinhart lifting her strategic stake in the minerals producer.
And Suncorp holding its AGM with Clive Van Horen, the chief of the banking unit, announced he will leave in December.
And a big one, Qantas never far from the news. Pilots declaring no confidence in the chair, Richard Goyder. Now, that is the first time such a call has been made by the union that represents the 3,000 Qantas pilots. And they've described the chair's position as untenable. This, of course, after the High Court, found that Qantas had illegally sacked almost 1,700 employees. So Qantas down 0.6%.
And of course, the ex-dividend season continues with Nick Scali paying a fully franked dividend of 35 cents per share and Altium paying a 29 cents per share dividend totaling 342 million. And there we can see the stocks going ex-dividend.
And we had two stocks of the day
I
today.
know,
Pro
two
Medicus
stocks.
and
PolyNovo, and I was actually just speaking to the chairman of PolyNovo. So 2 great interviews up there, but maybe we should check in with Philip Pepe and Rudy Philippek Van Dyke to see what their views were on the stocks of the day.
It's interesting. It is on a lazy 98 times PE. It has an E, so that's a positive apparently according to consensus data. It's well off its highs, just off its lows, so it's bouncing. I'm going to say wait for the full quarterly result rather than trade off a 2-month update because I'm cynical. So I'm going to call
Put forward is they will stumble at some point. It's just going to happen because they're a small company. They come from nowhere, and little things make big differences. So I personally think, also because where the share price is, and it not near their highs is an euphemism, it's much closer to the bottom than from recent. I think you can give them the benefit of the doubt, but you have to do that with the right sense of risk assessment. So you definitely don't make this a big holding in your portfolio. Just one of those places maybe in your portfolio, a few percentages here or whatever, just to have one of those stocks that potentially
that could blow up.
That could blow up. Do with those stocks is you don't buy them on a day like today because you don't buy them in the rally. But you know what? It's the share market. Crazy things happen. You just wait your time until someone decides on a given day that all the shares need to go down and Pro Medicus needs to go down as well, and you just give yourself a little bit of a margin of safety. But you can't wait for these stocks to become cheap, because when they ever become cheap, that means the growth story is over. That's when you don't want to have them.
Yeah.
Is going up because it's going up. People keep looking for reasons to buy. It's pushed through another 12-month high. Analysts will upgrade. It's always going to look fair value. Analysts will upgrade. Share price goes up. Analysts will upgrade. So fundamental valuation, throw it out the window.
Gosh, you are a cynic, aren't you?
No, it can do no wrong until it does something wrong. Will it do something wrong? We don't know. Reminds me a little bit of CSL. Everyone's jumped over CSL. Macquarie, everyone jumped over Macquarie until things slowed. So no, don't buy it today. Buy it before. And I'm going to call it a hold. Don't sell it because you don't sell your winners. And the charters tell me when a stock hits a 12-month high or an all-time high, which is what it's done today, that's actually a good.
Well, 2 very cautious guests today when it came to PolyNovo and Pro Medicus. But let's move on to our special guest for the COB. And it's great to have Martin Crabb from Shaw and Partners back in the studio. Martin, lovely to see you after your trip. And of course, you come back at a very interesting time.
Yes.
Bond yields, they're being they're a bit annoying for the equity markets, and this equity risk premium, maybe you can just run through some of the numbers there for the viewers.
Yeah, for sure. So when we're comparing investments, we need to look at them relative to other things, right? So if we're looking at the share market, let's compare it to what we can earn risk-free in a US government treasury. I mean, they're theoretically risk-free. The US could default, but it's probably not going to. So the yield on a US treasury is about 4.5%. The yield on an Australian 10 years about 4.3. So if we bought all the shares in the market and kept all the earnings, not the dividends, kept all the earnings, what would we be yielding? And that's called the equity yield, and that's 1 over the PE. So if you think the PE is 15, the equity yield's about 6 or 7. So we compare that to the bond yield and at 4.5, and we've got about a 2% equity risk premium. Now that sounds okay. So you're getting 2% more in equities than you are in bonds, and you get to grow your earnings. So that sounds okay. And you've already paid tax on the earnings, so that sounds okay. Well, what's it historically? It's much more like 4 or 5. So right now, that signal is telling us that equities are expensive relative to bonds. And if you look in the US, it's even more so. The equity risk premium there is about 1%. So US stocks look really expensive relative to US bonds. So there's the red line's the Australian equity risk premium. As I said, 12-month forward earnings divided by today's share prices minus the bond yield. And you can see it averages about 3.25 in Australia over the last 20 years. If you go back further, it's a little bit lower. But at the moment, that's telling us it's 1 standard deviation too low, which means the market's one standard deviation too expensive. So for that to come back into equilibrium or a long-term average, the market's got to go down by 10 or 15%, or the bond yield's got to fall by 1%. So difficult to see bond yields going back to 3.5 anytime soon. So that suggests that either the earnings have to grow to get the earnings yield up, or prices have to come back. So it's not the greatest asset allocation tool to use, because you can see that it spends long periods of time either very over or very undervalued. But generally speaking, if you invest when the equity risk premium is this low, you don't tend to do as well as normal.
I'm assuming you're using a calculator for all of that now. You and Danny were talking about how you used to write it on paper.
No, it was AI generated that chart. It's all AI now, Juliet.
All right, okay.
No, we still used calculators back then, Juliet.
All right, I want to ask a stock specific. That was a bit naughty of me. Qantas, I mean, we're talking about bad headlines every single day.
Yeah.
The pilots union now after Qantas is chairman as well.
Yep.
You're saying, though, it's too cheap where it is at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what could go even worse for Qantas?
I don't think
You know,
you want to put that question
Well,
out there.
the customers hate them, right? So there's lots of loyal long-term Qantas customers who say, I'm never flying that airline again.
Yeah.
You go to their lounges, they're horrible. There's food all over the floor.
Oh.
The chairs are all worn out. There's heaps of stuff online you can see about how bad the business lounges are. And just having been around the country with Qantas, I can tell you. So their customers hate them, their employees hate them, their employees had to take them to court. The pilots have come out and said, sack the chairman. So, their customers hate them, their employees hate them. Some of the shareholders probably hate them because the share price is falling at the moment. It's down, 10, 15%. What else? But you've got a new CEO, and you're probably going to get a refreshed board. And are they going to let things get worse, or are they going to start improving them? So the company took one tiny little step yesterday by saying we were going to invest $80 million in our customers. They're making $2.5 billion at the moment. So the new CEO should be spending more like $800 million on customers and upgrades and
what
new
did you think of the no dividend, but we're going to give you extra status points?
No, not a fan of that one. So I think they will return to paying dividends. I think they obviously went on a sort of a dividend holiday to retain capital, so they've got plenty of cash to do upgrades because they need to upgrade their fleet and the lounges.
CapEx,
so I just think in the future, Qantas won't do as bad a job with its customers and bad a job with its employees going forward. So I think it's one of those things, you don't look at the levels, look at the rate of change. And at 5 times earnings, I mean, the stock can halve its profits and still be on 10 times earnings. So I think there's plenty of upside. I think it's more like a $7 or $8 stock. But I realise, it's a pariah at the moment, and everyone hates it, and everyone's downgrading. Fuel costs are hurting, et cetera, et cetera. And will we travel with the same gusto in the next 12 months that we have in the last? I'm not sure, but I think that's really, really baked in. So just on valuation and the view that look at the rate of change, will it get better or will it get better rather than worse? I'm saying you can start adding to it at $5.
Interesting. Yes, they're going to have to get rid of the lying kangaroo instead of the flying kangaroo as their motto.
Well, the other one I heard was quick and nasty, typical Australian service. That's what Qantas stands for.
Gosh.
When people putting Life 360 tiles in their suitcases, they're the trackers,
They can find them.
So they can find them, which country they're in. Okay, enough Qantas jokes, because I'm sure there are some shareholders out there. And there are definitely shareholders of the next company, ResMed.
Yeah.
Now, this is one of the biggest stories. Both Juliet and I...
We have differing opinions.
No, not at all, not at all. I'm not punching holes in the silver bullet with these weight loss drugs, but the real question is, are they going to change the paradigm for sleep apnea, which will ultimately disrupt ResMed? That's the key question.
Yeah, there's 3 things going on with ResMed. One was the result, the fourth quarter result, which came out on the 3rd of August. They guided to improved margins from Q3 to Q4, and they came in worse. Took everyone by surprise. The stock was down 9% on the day. 5 days later, Novo Nordisk came out with their Select trial, the one that showed that their anti-obesity and anti-diabetes drugs worked and reduced your heart failure rate by 20% and reduced your weight by 20%. So both Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk share prices went through the roof. And then anything to do with obstructive sleep apnea and anything to do with diabetes pumps or things like that got absolutely smashed. So the world's, we've turned around and said obesity is now cured. There's 1 billion obese people in the world, and it's growing by 15% per annum. There's 2 billion overweight people. So there's a lot of people out there. This drug's expensive. It's about $1,000 a month. So governments of the world won't be able to afford to get everyone on this drug. And, my view is that the Novo Nordisk share price has overreacted to the upside and everything else has overreacted to the downside. This isn't a cure for diabetes or obesity, but people are assuming it is. So, as you know, ResMed's down from $34 to 20, I think it's 22 today. That's a pretty big de-rating. And it's basically saying that the market for masks, CPAP masks, is kind of going to dry up, not, where it's continuing to grow. So it's very undiagnosed. That's one of the bull stories for ResMed, is that not a lot of people who have sleep apnea know they've got sleep apnea, and there is not a cure, but there's a remedy for it that helps improve your life. So not many people would know that President Biden wears a CPAP mask, for example. So it's keeping him afloat, right? So it can't be a bad thing. And so I think, it's one of these things where the market has overestimated it in the short term, is the impact of this, and as a result, you can buy insulin related stocks a lot cheaper, and sleep apnea related stocks a lot cheaper. So we think ResMed's a buy.
All right, but as you say, price should be probably closer to $25. All right, Martin, great to have you with us. Martin Crabb from Shaw and
Thanks,
Partners.
Julia.
All right, let's have a look at some of the market leaders in the session today. Pro Medicus, we've been talking about that the whole time.
Absolutely, and PolyNovo. So both of those interviews will be up on the website today. Interesting, there we go. ResMed finally finding some love there, up 2.5%. Paladin Energy continuing to do well on higher uranium prices. Well, I don't know if they were actually higher overnight. BrainChip, that one tends to fly around, Juliet. It's sort of down one day, up the next. But it's quite encouraging, I think, to see some buying, particularly in the healthcare, medtech, sort of biotech space, because traditionally that space should be relatively defensive in a market that potentially comes down, as Martin was just saying.
I think it should be interesting tomorrow as well, when we look at broker moves, whether or not there's going to be any further up or down, well, it's probably upgrades for Pro Medicus, because Citi research, as I was talking about earlier, came out just a little late in the afternoon saying, $25 million per year upside. All right, let's look at the laggards now. Chalice Mining, it's often in the laggards, isn't it?
Yeah, they've had lots of problems with, some results that they had. Imogene, is there any new news there? That's been in the headlines for quite a while. It's funny, a lot of these stocks keep on making an appearance. Sayona Mining off 4.9%, Sierra Resources off 4.8%, and Bega, we haven't seen that name for a while, although I do know that the dairy industry is not having the best time at the moment.
No, I'm just trying to find some news, but that was about a month ago when it said its dividend would be reduced. Bega Cheese is one that I was excited to come home to, Danny, I have to say. I quite like their cheese. Can't
Coming
get it
home,
overseas.
Exactly, coming home to the Vegemite and the Bega
And
cheese,
the Bega
and
that's
probably
a
the
good
Vita
idea.
Wheats.
Yes, indeed.
And-
that was also on my shopping list. All right, let's get back to the markets. Zero Resources down by 4.8%. So it really is these small mining players. And I did note as well, it's not in the top 5 laggards, but Qantas, as we've been talking, under pressure too. All right, a quick look at the small cap leaders and laggards as well as we round out the session. Peninsula Energy, they're up by about 15%, CVC up 8%, and having a look at some of the laggards in that small cap space. Botanics Pharma, I was speaking to the MD here. So an interesting story. They are looking at a treatment for excessive sweating, a new drug application, but the Food and Drug Administration knocked back their application until they release more information to users as how they administer this excessive sweating thing. So that came under pressure, down 24%, but no surprise, the CEO MD telling me, look, they think they're going to get this approved, 45 days to turn it around, and he thinks there will be significant upside after that.
Yeah, and I'm just checking, Imogen, basically they've got a capital raising of 18.2 million, share purchase plan, and they're issuing 325 million shares at 5.6 cents a share. So that would account for a lot of the fall in that share price.
Yep. All right, let's have a look at what is happening overnight. We've got some Eurozone speakers talking about how that economy is faring. So the ECB's Lane, Simkus and Muller all speaking.
Oh, there we go. And US house price data for the month of July and new home sales. So that'll be interesting because new home sales have actually managed to stay relatively robust. US home builders have been providing, let's say, subsidised mortgage rates to new home buyers. And let's just check in. Oh, there we go. August CPI tomorrow, as well as China industrial profits for August. That'll be interesting. And we have ex-dividend Maya. Ooh,
I know this
CWP.
is where it starts
I should know that one.
VSL is Vulcan Steel, and CWP also going
Cedarwood Properties.
Cedarwood Properties. There
Exactly.
You go. It's always a trap for young players. All right, let's have a quick look at the markets as we round out this session. Down 4 points on the CBO 200 index, off by 1/3%. The ASX 200 dropping 38 points or 0.5% to 7,038.
And just really quickly, the Aussie dollar, interesting. It is off. Well, it's teetering on that 64 US cent level again, which it has been testing that level for quite a while. And if we just go across and see how the US futures are sitting at the moment, and regrettably, I think those bond markets at this point in time are continuing to put downward pressure on US minis.
All right, I'm going to go home, have some Vegemite and cheese on my Vita Eats. You're going home too, but we'll be back tomorrow.
We will be back tomorrow. Have a great evening, everyone.
See you tomorrow.
The COB is presented by Rabobank. Awarded 2023 SMSF Savings Bank of the Year by Mozo.